Long the subject of speculation among game designers, nerds of all stripes, and armchair historians, the idea of technology coming to blows on the battlefield with magic is synonymous with many of the most evocative and interesting concepts in modern science fiction and in fantasy. And as exciting as it may seem, it's something that could make for some fantastic role-playing. Hello everyone, my name is Kyle Ott, and welcome to Desks and Dorks. We talk about tabletop role-playing and indie games, usually with a historical bent. Before we get started with our video today, which is going to cover technology and magic and how those two forces might come into conflict on the battlefield, a couple things. If you want to support us, $10 a month, you get your own unique role-playing game over on Patreon. You can also get physical copies of our games from Tabletop Bookshelf and Indie Press Revolution, and you can get digital copies over on itch.io. And in fact, by the time that you're watching this is the last 24 hours of our Halloween sale, so if you're interested in picking up some of our games at a pretty steep discount, it's now the best time to do it. Now, let's talk about what we're going to be discussing with today's video. Magic and technology have never really existed at the same place and time, so how am I, somebody who has some training in history, going to actually break that down? Well, I'm actually going to be looking at times where there were massive imbalances between two different forces, or when those forces or nations used wildly different tactics for different reasons. I think that's as close to an allegory or an analog to this sort of issue as we're going to come. We're really going to be just talking about large-scale conflict in general, the logistics, the tactics, and the things that would make it work, and how you might turn that into your fantasy game. Also, one more important thing, if you have followed our videos for any length of time, you know that I like to actually have an example that runs through the video so that you guys can take a look at what's going on. And I have included an old friend from one of our previous examples. This video is designed as a companion piece to our magic and technology and culture video that we did, and I thought it was only proper to bring back Alesia, the fantasy kingdom that we all designed together in that video, back for this one. With that out of the way, we do have to establish one quick thing. What do I mean when I say technology? At the risk of being a cliche YouTube video essayist, I use the actual definition to start this conversation, right? Machinery developed using scientific knowledge is technically the definition of technology. However, I don't think it's very accurate for us, right? A shovel is a groundbreaking invention, skidooch, that is technically a piece of technology, right? A shovel is designed using the scientific knowledge of things like fulcrums. However, I don't think that's going to be what we're really using or is very important or evocative in terms of this discussion. For our terms, it's any device or innovation that would lead to a significant leap over the period a game is based on, since a lot of fantasy role-playing games tend to have their DNA in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Anything above that would be huge. So something like stirrups, which might lead to a wonderful advantage during a cavalry charge, are going to be totally fine, even though, again, they're technology. However, if you were to bring an M60 machine gun onto the medieval battlefield, one might imagine that would lead to a significant advantage. And with that established, let's return once again to the kingdom of Alesian. For those who did not have a chance to watch the other video first, the Kingdom of Alesian was, for much of its existence, a pretty stereotypical fantasy kingdom governed by a king, ruled over by knights and lords, and defined by the guilds, both merchant and adventurer, that continue to rule over it. However, the arrival of a wonderful comet, a powerful piece of magical ore called Magistone, changed everything, and this glowing magical rock altered Alesian's entire existence almost overnight, changing everything from weapons to transportation to industry to culture. And as a result of that, the kingdom has been plunged into a kind of crisis, a cataclysm, as different social groups all around its borders try to gobble up as much Magistone as possible, convert it into weapons and equipment, in order to gain dominance over the new world that is steadily unfolding in front of their very eyes. This is going to be the change and the sort of foundation upon which we build our understanding of how magic and technology might interact in a fantasy world. Which leads us to consider tactics. You see, a lot of the early ways of battling, even some of the more advanced tactics of the ancient and medieval world, go kind of out of the way when you get technology involved, particularly when you get magic involved too. We're actually kind of exacerbating the issues of warfare. Gone are the days where you could have time to deploy your soldiers in a hammer and anvil, or when you could exploit gaps in the line, where faster moving infantry or heavy cavalry could potentially exploit those, causing the army to rout. The one tactic I do think is going to continue no matter what, however, is the good old-fashioned ambush, particularly when you don't know what kind of magic or abilities or technology your opponents are bringing to bear. Being able to take them out before they can use any of those things is an incredibly efficient way to make sure that you don't get vibe checked by the magical powers and returned to the ephemeral lobby. However, I do think this goes into a much more important and interesting discussion about asymmetric warfare, which, for those of you who don't know, is when two sides gear up and they battle and one side is at a distinct disadvantage, causing them to wage conflict in a very different way, right? I don't think in this type of world where magic and technology might intersect, a walled off city or town is going to be particularly effective. In fact, this is proven true during the advent of modern warfare into the Renaissance period and past the Renaissance period where we get to the Napoleonic era. Pretty much by the time of Gustavus Adolphus from Sweden, Western Europe kind of gets plunged into turmoil, and while walled towns and forts are still incredibly effective, gone is the age of the protracted siege and castle. I think this is true too for wizards' towers, especially if magic and technology are coming to bear. You don't want to gather everybody that knows everything about magic or everybody that knows everything about technology into one place that can be collapsed, destroyed, leveled, any of those things, right? There's a lot to be said about losing your entire base of knowledge all in one single moment. And this is especially true when eventually people with magical powers or technological advantages might develop something of a given super weapon. I think that's kind of an important thing. If somebody can drop Shadow Wizard Money Gang wizard nukes, I don't really want to be in a place that I can be easily found, particularly if I'm not on the side of the Shadow Wizard Money Gang. I don't really like being turned into some sort of, magical firework, no matter how good or how catchy the Katy Perry song is. Plus, with the ability to create ambushes, you can learn a lot more about a given fighting force. For example, attacking a group of wizards only to find out that you have managed to eliminate some of their apprentices might give you some context and some information about the kinds of weapons, spells, and abilities they are attempting to bring to bear. And similarly, protecting yourself from the technological advantage is a huge deal, and I think that leads us nicely into trenches. This is something we haven't really discussed, except to say that in the Middle Ages, most people probably would have been digging or creating a lot more fortifications, but I think this is especially true and necessary in the event that magic and technology come to bear. Both magic and technology are capable of eliminating somebody, essentially from existence at a far distance. You don't even have to necessarily see or be able to hear your target sometimes in order to do that, right? A fireball doesn't exactly particularly care about things like, soft cover, and neither does a howitzer shell. You see, trench warfare comes with quite a few different abilities, quite a few advantages in a world where a single snap of the fingers or a squeeze of the trigger could be the last thing that you see. In fact, one of the big things about trench warfare in general is it offers no immediate target. And I can hear you saying, well, no duh, Kyle, dadoy, they're in the ground. However, the big thing about trenches is that their entire design is there to obfuscate the amount of soldiers that are present, the weapons and equipment those soldiers have, and the importance of the individual soldier as a whole. While there are many strengths tactically to the trench, anonymity, I would argue, is one of its most important. And this is really interesting when you consider that if you reveal your position, it puts you in immediate danger. This is true whether or not you are a wizard who is carrying out immense tactical loops of spells over and over, or the person in the platoon who is able to call in the artillery strikes, because you can hide your most valuable members in the trench because they don't know exactly where they are in the trench in order to make that targeted attack. And if you reveal your own position, it actually means, hey, guess what? You're in danger of a counterstrike. It kind of turns warfare into this game of chicken, and when, again, every shot, every spell could be the last thing coming, that's really important because somebody has to be willing to blink first. I've included a couple of these different cells of what are essentially World War I era tree stands that are built for snipers and built for, not snipers, but for actually forward scouts for people to relay information back to the trench, because I think those things are indicative of the importance of information gathering in trench warfare. The other thing too is that it offers, again, a base of operation with no clear target. When you need to have your ability to command a unit, whether it is a unit of wizards or a unit of riflemen, it's important to have your command structure have a place that is sealed off and away from attack, and building trenches often makes it so that you can totally and completely create a base of operations where all of your command structure, the people you need to be there to carry out the battle itself, aren't going to get nuked from orbit in, 15 seconds flat, like they would if we were still establishing massive camps in the medieval army sense. I think that's a really, really important thing to take note of. And by the way, I've included a bunch of pictures and texts here, sketches here on how trenches would be designed, even things as simple as like latrines and urinals to provide for cover. All of that goes to say there's a lot of thought that goes into protecting your command structure, the people you need on the battlefield. And I think trenches, more so than anything else, would be the immediate adaptation to this type of battle if spells, their lethality in open range being, pretty well established in most fantasy settings, and technology, which is equally lethal in open range, would come into conflict. I also think, too, that it's not totally crazy to expect like a Viet Cong style of tunnel system to be made in a fantasy world where this is common. There are already great fantasy races that kind of do this. The Drow, the Dwarves, Goblins of pretty much every stripe. Or if you've played the phenomenal role-playing game Heart, the entire world of Heart is basically one big tunnel-esque dungeon complex. But these are a phenomenal way for individuals to wage asymmetric warfare. They offer all of the tactical advantage of a trench, right? Nobody can see you, it's hard to find you, it obfuscates your numbers and your lethality, it obfuscates the amount of strength that you have and the importance of the individuals present, but it also allows you to be a little bit more offensive. You can stage ambushes from different parts of your tunnel system without immediate fear of reprisal, and I think that's kind of an important thing to take into consideration, because the biggest part of asymmetric warfare, the reason I think that tactics like an ambush or like those tunnel systems the Viet Cong dug would appear in a fantasy world where magic and technology come to blows, is that a prolonged battle equals death. The longer that you are present on the battlefield, the more chances that you present the enemy to use their most powerful weapons against you, the more likely you are to fail. And this is true in the modern world, and this is true in fantasy literature. And I can't help but think that if those two things combined, it would be any different, which leads us to our good friends, the Alesians. Now, we have talked a little bit about trench warfare, and for the Alesians, now with their Magistone weapons and armor, trench warfare doesn't become a necessity, it becomes a way of life, with vast trench systems being used to essentially block the worst attacks, and individuals capable of navigating those trench systems and scavenging new weapons and armor from them actually going to rise through the ranks, becoming leaders, heroes, warriors, and perhaps even, if you were to run this in your own role-playing games, adventurers. And in fact, what you have are different scavenger classes based on the individuals who are present. The peasantry, the merchants, the knights, and those still loyal to the crown all have different ways of setting up their trench systems and different attempts to protect the battlefield when they are going out on campaign. It is in these different and disparate types of ruins, like this one for example, that maybe your players are going to play the game. This could be a dungeon crawler, in quotes, but it is a dungeon crawler of individuals moving from trench system to trench system, battling in close quarters combat, eking out a shall we say, Pyrrhic victory, only to return to their trench headquarters, having snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, and sacrificed so much to only gain a few inches. I think a system like that is indicative of some of my favorite games, like Never Going Home, but I think it's important for us to talk about infrastructure now, and if you're keeping track with your honorary desks and Dorks bingo sheets, you may take a shot or mark a bingo space because Kyle mentioned infrastructure, but it's really important. I think it's actually hypercritical in the kind of world that we are forming. You see, Magic and industry share something in common, and that is that they need a place to be set up. Neither of these things, whether you are building an automobile or helping an apprentice craft a magical item, can exist in a vacuum. You need factories, you need laboratories, mentors, and academies to help create this. Like a certain economic philosopher and important Russian figure might want to say, the means of production really truly matter in this instant. And we have to talk at first about magic infrastructure, because I don't think you think of factories and assembly lines when you think of wizards, but I have to tell you, there is a kind of infrastructure that goes into these things. You need trained masters to help sculpt the minds of new pupils, to help walk them through the infinite winds of reality and help them become the kind of magicians and wizards, sorcerers that they are meant to be. Without their guidance, these new apprentices are never going to become archmages, wizards, and crafters of the winds of power. You also need tons of specialized training. Usually this comes in the form of books or tomes with ancient knowledge, grimoires stuffed to the brim with the kind of secrets that people fight actual wars over. But it also goes to things like reagents or spell components for crafting potions, or especially important pieces of monster or historical artifacts that go into crafting the kinds of weapons and high-level incantations that one might expect from a powerful wizard. Or how about just, the people who know how to get those things, craft those recipes, or prepare a space, whether it's a workshop or an alchemist's laboratory, in order for a wizard to practice. If somebody was to take out the supply of Newt's Eye, or if somebody was going to make sure that any glade where the druids could carry out an important ritual, or if someone were to take out all of the wizards, it would make for a very difficult time. Seriously, if I am running a modern military and I know that I'm going up against somebody with a wizard academy, the first thing I'm doing is enacting Operation Shadow Wizard Money Gang and leveling the place. Similarly, if I know my opponents have a grave importance on rare reagents, things that they absolutely desperately need to make the kind of horrifying, melting spells that I don't want to face, I am going to do to those workshops and those alchemical warehouses what high-level capital did to Toys R Us, and I'm going to delete it from existence. Or if there are rare grimoires with ancient knowledge and the secrets of life and death which can be wielded by anybody with the magical training and the wherewithal to make it happen, I am going to Fahrenheit 451 that stuff into oblivion. Infrastructure is important, and when I say infrastructure, I mean the systems in place culturally and economically that hold up and would prop up a magical society. If I am fighting against wizards on the battlefield, I am going straight for whatever their equivalent of a Michael's is, and I am leveling it. It's an important thing to take into account. But that level of infrastructure cuts both ways. The people who are snickering in the comments going, hee, the technology wins. Do you know how much of our technology right now in the modern world is so fragile? Think about semiconductors for a second. We are right now in the middle of a geopolitical arms race to see who can, produce semiconductors, because right now the biggest place to make them is Taiwan, which is essentially caught in a tug of war match between us, China, and the rest of the world, because if something happens to them, everything from cars to refrigerators to life-saving medical equipment, and yes, the military equipment we all desperately need to wage war, becomes infinitely harder for us to beat. And even if we were able to make and create semiconductor plants, the process of making semiconductors is incredibly difficult. I actually researched it for this video. Did you guys know they actually take silicon wafers and then essentially sculpt them and then treat them in a high-level UV radiation bath? Essentially, they make what is like a thinking wafer to put into the semiconductor. It's nuts. The process of making a single semiconductor is a delicate dance of a ton of different levels of expertise and the manufacturing areas necessary to create that kinds of things. And you might be thinking, well, we could just use simple tech like bullets, but again, even if you have bullets, you would need to find and refine the cheap metals like brass to help make the bullet casings, and also you would need to find a way to create, make, and store the gunpowder while it's being packed. Now, I don't know about all of you fine folks, but every time I play a fantasy role-playing game, there's at least one wizard who really likes to shoot fire out of every orifice in their body, and as this picture right here of a Great Philadelphia explosion might actually point out, fire plus gunpowder equal bad. And again, if I'm a wizard, I'm going straight for those things, and indeed, going after ammo depots and weapons manufacturing was a major part of pretty much every world war. It's important. So if I'm a wizard and I have access to, magical information gathering technology, shape-changing magic, and the ability to, rewrite the laws of reality, I'm going right for your ability to make tanks and planes. So, ammo factory? Not in my house. Oh, semiconductors? Oh, the things you need to make the fighter planes that are gunning down my hippogriffs? No. Lockheed Martin? No. More like Block D's flaming nuts. That's exactly what's gonna happen, and I would go after it. Good luck trying to, destroy me with fighter planes when every one of your planes is grounded because I've torched every aspect of your technological infrastructure. Again, this battle between magic and technology is going to come down to which side is able to destroy the other side's ability to make and produce its most elite weapons. Whether those weapons come in the form of advanced fighting weapons with biometrics and tons of explosive ordnance, or mages who are able to rewrite the laws of nature and science with a flick of their fingers. But all of this talk of infrastructure, well, it means we have to touch back with our good friends over in Alesia. Now, see, the Alesians have approached infrastructure and their never-ending trench warfare over the Magistone in some very interesting and intriguing ways. One of the things that they have decided to do is to create living suits of armor that can not only act as soldiers and mini forts if needed, but are also there to carry the Magistone that powers them. Essentially, this suit runs off a small supply of Magistone while carrying a little bit of it inside them. Essentially, it makes a mobile infrastructure, which makes it harder to track down and pin down, and also harder to take. Because of this, the Alesian artificers, the wizards, the sorcerers, the people in charge of this magic and technological blend have tried desperately to shrink the Alesian sort of automaton in order to actually allow them into the trenches themselves. They haven't gotten there quite yet, so usually these larger, more mobile living forts will move miles away from the trench system itself, but are able to move and maneuver so that the Magistone can get where it needs to go, even miles behind the front itself. Another thing that the Alesians have done is to create kind of living fortresses inside of other naturally occurring features in their world. They make factories in the sides of mountains, they dig false workshops inside of dead trees, and they burrow under the ground, and again, make trenches on top of trenches. But in this case, they hide their infrastructure from one another. The peasantry and the merchants are especially good at this, creating burrows in the depleted earth to allow them to not only harvest more Magistone, but process more Magistone, but hide from the enemies that are always trying to get access to their power source. Ultimately, what this does is it turns Alesia into not just a militarized region, but into a kind of fortress factory, a country that is as much assembly line as it is nation state, as much a workshop as it is a place where people live, a battlefield, and a crucible of industry. In this way, Alesian is slowly turning into something that is no longer an organic country or a nation state at all. It's not a kingdom, it's a never-ending force of production. But this all leads to one more thing that I think we have to take into account, and that is the formation of elite units. You see, medieval warfare was driven largely by unprofessional massed armies. A levy would be called up to grab foot soldiers to join into the battle, and for the most part, the commanding officers were heavily trained knights or nobility, sometimes professional mercenaries, but the bulk of the force was a large amount of, in many cases, poorly trained assembled infantry, and that is basically not going to work here. That is just going to be chaff before the red-hot scythe of either magic or the power of modern tech. As a result, I think what's going to happen is the massing and mustering of forces is not going to occur, but instead the formation of elites who are able to take on important missions and battle against enemies as they are found is going to arise. There's a lot of stuff that I think these elite kind of units would do well, right? It's harder to find or eliminate smaller ones. They tend to be more efficient, both on the battlefield and in terms of their bureaucracy, and with a small amount of people, it means that you have a more intimate kind of mentorship. It's easy to pass down the kinds of skills needed to make and create, to sculpt and empower a new generation of warriors and a new generation of agents. And the Alesians take to this almost immediately. The merchants create these spell breakers, essentially people who are not born, but are trained into the unit, who carve spells into coins that can then be exchanged for stuff, but also the coins can be flicked or thrown to activate spells that are powerful, but also draw upon the ore inside the natural world around them to literally pay for the magic from Mother Nature's bounty, which is very objectively terrifying. Both the peasantry and the king's faction, however, create spell duelists. The peasantry actually taking it upon themselves to learn magic at a younger age and mix it with the Magistone, and then try to get into as many fights as possible with the king's mages, who have dueling academies where they learn. So you have a kind of street tough brawler mentality of the peasantry, coupled with an academy-based magical dueling mentality in terms of the king's men. This means you have two divergent schools of thought with two very similar combat styles, because let's be real here for a second, who doesn't love it when two elite super units go toe-to-toe with differing actual desires and differing, shall we say, movements? And on top of all of that, you have mercenaries who ply their trade to the highest bidder, or to the faction they feel is the one that more closely aligns with their virtues. Essentially, what we have done is we've taken Renaissance-era Italy, all of its interscene political and economic conflicts, its armies of mercenaries, and then we've just kind of combined it with a horrific nation-state-wide level of industry that's kind of Big Brother meets, Warpstone from Warhammer, which I kind of love. I don't think I would like to live in this country, but I do think it would make for an interesting and compelling game. And speaking of countries, national and international conflict, I think, is going to be an inevitability in the kind of world where this happens. Imagine you have elite units that are trained in clandestine activities, who have the ability, the wherewithal, and the know-how to go into heavily guarded areas and get what they want, sometimes with incredibly violent results. And I can't help but imagine that in the world that we are constructing, where Alesia takes place and where the Alesians are fighting to the death for the Magistone, I can't help but wonder, what if it wasn't just one comet? What if there are others on this world that didn't land in the country like this one that started to process it first? What will the Alesians do when they realize that Magistone has landed in other places? And I think that's a good place for us to end the video today. If you like what we do here at Desks and Dorks and you want to support us, $10 a month gets you your own unique role-playing game on Patreon. I really love and appreciate all my patrons over there. But if you want our physical copies, you could get them on Tabletop Bookshelf, Indie Press Revolution, and today is the last day for that amazing sale. So if you want to get some of our RPGs at the cheapest they have ever been, please head over to itch.io. It's the great time to do it. Oh, and you can also become a YouTube member. That would be helpful too. And our Discord is completely free. So if you want to take part in the conversations over there, we'd love to have you. It's free $59. But with that out of the way, I do have to have a massive thanks to my patrons: Dionysus, Chris Bates, Agile Monk, Kavati, Alex.vksh, Solution, Stefan Brosseau, Brian, Gorbino the Great, Papa Dinosaur, Chromatic Orbital Strike, Chris Mare, Darth, Arcane Bard, Commander Unidentified, Darjeeling Trailblazer, Carl Agius, David Z, Michael Torres, and Talath. You are all absolutely amazing. And to my YouTube members, Ro.kn, Gaming Gambison, Agile Monk, Joshua Williams, Artemis, Marcus Miller, Samuel Putnam, Siralder, Chandler Dwyer, Sir Goldenschmidt, Jakob, Marcus Miller, Krebo, Teddy, Raymond Jang, Brody Strumpf, and Ryan D. And also up, up, down, down, left, right. I actually want to issue an apology to you, up, up, down, down, left, right. When I update this list, which I have to update it pretty frequently. Thank you for making that a problem, by the way, everybody, that I have to update this pretty frequently. Your name, for whatever reason, didn't get bumped to like the section on the YouTube where my newest patrons would, or my newest YouTube members would appear, and so I've actually missed you for a couple videos. So I'm really sorry. Up, up, down, down, left, right. I hope you stick around. Thank you so much for your support. But I wanted to correct that error because I try to get it as soon as I get you guys in, which, again, I'm not complaining. This is a great problem to have. But just so you all know, if I forget somebody, I promise this is a one-man operation. So I'm trying my best. But I really do appreciate it. The work that you guys do, the contributions that you guys make help me to continue to make the kinds of videos like these. And I really like it, and I really appreciate all that you do for me. So, in that case, folks, I am Kyle Ott for Desks and Dorks. You all have been absolutely amazing, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.